Welcome back to Olivia's Threads. Get comfortable because today is all about what happens when authority figures go too far. We're looking at a school administration that tried to silence an entire culture. The principal thought he held all the cards, but he didn't realize that sometimes the quietest students are the ones keeping the best receipts. Let's get into the thread. The rule of silence. Our principal, Mr. Harris, spent every morning announcement reminding us that speaking any language other than English would result in immediate punishment. One day, he claimed he overheard kids plotting in Spanish, and from that day on, teachers patrolled the hallways, the bathrooms, and even the parking lot, listening for anything that wasn't English. One word meant a 3-day suspension, plus a note on your permanent record. Mr. Harris loved telling assemblies that English was the language of success. Spanish was all my family spoke at home, so going the whole school day without using a single word of Spanish was exhausting and stressful. My mom stopped coming to school events after a teacher corrected her accent in front of other parents. Kids would hang up on their parents mid-call rather than risk answering in their native language and getting suspended. The Puerto Rican kids, the Vietnamese kids, the Haitian kids, we all walked around like half ourselves, our real voices trapped in our throats, living in fear. My friend got suspended for calling out to his grandmother in Spanish when she picked him up. Another lost his scholarship for accidentally cursing in French when he stubbed his toe. I kept my phone hidden and silenced because my grandmother, who lived with us and only spoke Spanish, had worsening heart problems. My mom worked at a warehouse 40 minutes away where she couldn't always answer calls, making me the emergency contact. 2 years without a suspension meant I'd perfected the art of swallowing Spanish words before they could escape, even when other kids tried to trick me into responding as a joke. I'd also figured out workarounds that technically didn't break the rule. When my grandmother called during lunch, I'd answer with just mm-hmm and no while she talked in Spanish, making it sound like I was agreeing with someone speaking English nearby. When my grandmother had a minor fall and called during passing period, I had to stand in the bathroom stall, saying nothing but yes and no while she asked me questions, terrified that someone would hear me if I spoke. I tapped out codes we developed where 3 taps meant take your medicine and 4 meant call mom instead. It took 15 minutes to make sure she was okay without actually speaking to her, and I was late to chemistry. But at least I hadn't gotten suspended. The emergency. I thought I could keep managing these situations with creative solutions until graduation. My grandmother knew about the rule and tried to only call for real emergencies, but sometimes she forgot or got confused. We had a whole system worked out where the neighbor would text me first if something was really wrong, and I'd know to step outside school property before calling back. But emergencies don't always follow your careful plans. During history class, my phone vibrated 12 times in my pocket before I finally checked it under my desk. My neighbor only had this number for emergencies with my grandmother, and she'd never called more than twice before. My hands were shaking as I saw the missed calls climbing to 20, then 25. The second our teacher turned to write on the board, I slipped out into the hallway and called back. The choice. My neighbor was screaming in Spanish that my grandmother had collapsed and was barely breathing. She couldn't translate the name of my grandmother's heart medication for the paramedics, and they couldn't understand what she was trying to tell them. The medication had a long name that sounded similar to the one she was allergic to, and in her panic, my neighbor kept mixing them up. I tried our tapping system, but she was crying too hard to understand it. I tried typing the medication name in a text, but she couldn't read my screen to the paramedics while holding the phone to her ear. There was no creative solution this time. My grandmother was dying, and I had to choose between her life and my future at this school. I ran down the empty hallway toward the exit, speaking rapid Spanish, explaining exactly where the medication was kept. In the bathroom cabinet, 3rd shelf, behind the vitamins, in the white bottle, not the blue one. My neighbor put me on speaker so I could talk to the paramedics, but they didn't speak Spanish either, so I was translating frantically back and forth while running to my car. The medical terms came out in whatever language I could think of them in. Switching between Spanish and English so fast, I couldn't track which language I was speaking, just desperate to get the information across about her heart medication and her deadly penicillin allergy. Caught in the act. Then back to Spanish to call my neighbor, who kept asking if my grandmother was going to die. I was so focused on getting every detail right that I didn't notice Principal Harris standing by the main entrance, watching me speak the forbidden language that could save my grandmother's life. He had his phone out recording everything, his face completely unreadable. She survived because the paramedics knew not to give her the medication she was allergic to. The doctor said the allergy information I translated saved her life, that the wrong medication would have killed her in minutes. The next morning, I walked into first period to find Principal Harris sitting at my teacher's desk with his laptop open. The whole class was dead silent. He turned the laptop toward me, showing security footage from the hallway with clear audio of me speaking rapid Spanish on my phone. "Would you like to explain?" he said, pulling out a suspension form with my name already filled in. "Why you thought you were exempt from our English-only policy." The punishment. My legs felt like concrete blocks stuck to the floor. The whole class stared at me while Mr. Harris tapped his finger on the suspension form that already had my name written in black ink. My mouth went completely dry, like I'd been eating sand. He wasn't really asking me anything. He was putting on a show for everyone else. The laptop screen kept playing the security footage on repeat, showing me running down the hall with my phone pressed to my ear. My hands started shaking when I tried to speak. My grandmother was dying, and the paramedics couldn't understand which medication would kill her. Mr. Harris held up his hand to stop me before I could explain more. Emergencies don't override school policy. You could have found another way. His voice stayed perfectly calm, but his eyes looked at me like I was just another problem to file away. The suspension form sat there between us like a guilty verdict that had already been decided before I even walked in. Can I call my mom to explain what's happening? He shook his head slowly. She'll need to speak English during school hours or bring an approved interpreter. The whole class shifted in their seats, but nobody said anything. Even calling for help had rules attached to it. My hands shook harder as I slipped my phone back into my pocket. Mr. Harris opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick packet of papers with yellow highlighter marks all over them. He pushed it across the desk toward me. Your disciplinary hearing is scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. You have the right to bring a parent or guardian, but all proceedings will be conducted in English only. Isolation. The bell rang and everyone grabbed their bags and rushed out without looking at me. Their eyes stayed glued to the floor or their phones as they squeezed past my desk. Mr. Harris packed up his laptop and walked out, leaving me standing there alone with a packet in my hands. The hallway was already filling up with kids heading to second period when I finally made my legs move. Whispers followed me down the hall like a swarm of bees. Some kids pulled out their phones to text while staring at me. Others made jokes loud enough for me to hear about getting sent to Spanish jail. My face burned hot, but I kept walking and tried to look like I didn't care. The office secretary appeared and led me to the administrative office, pointing at a hard plastic chair near the window. You're excused from classes today, but you must remain here until dismissal. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making my head hurt. I texted my neighbor, asking if my grandmother was okay. The thought of her being alone at home made my stomach twist into knots. The secretary handed me a form to write my official statement. The blank lines stared back at me. Everything sounded wrong when I tried to explain life and death situations in formal English. I kept starting over because my grammar mistakes made me look guilty of something worse than speaking Spanish. After my 5th attempt, I asked if I could get a copy of Mr. Harris's recording. The secretary didn't even look up. That's internal evidence that students can't access. The rumor mill. My stomach dropped like I was falling off a cliff. They had proof I couldn't even see or respond to properly. Another student sitting across from me waiting for the counselor leaned over and whispered that the hallway cameras have audio recording. I hadn't known that before. My brain started racing. I pulled out a notebook and started writing down exact times and locations. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend saying people were already spreading rumors. They were saying I planned to break the rule on purpose to make some kind of political statement. The lie was spreading faster than I could possibly correct it. More texts came in asking if I was trying to be some kind of hero or if I just wanted attention. I turned off my phone notifications and shoved it deep in my backpack. The clock on the wall moved so slowly I thought it might be broken. Other kids walked past the office window and stared at me like I was an animal in a zoo. The form still sat there, mostly blank. How could I explain in perfect English grammar that my grandmother's life mattered more than their stupid rule? Building a defense. A note taped to my locker said the guidance office had scheduled me an appointment with Orlando Frey, a counselor who supposedly helped bilingual students. The next morning, I met him. He turned out to be a quiet guy with glasses who actually listened. He explained that while the school has broad authority, there were district policies about discrimination they might be violating. He couldn't promise anything, but he gave me a list of what to document. His office felt safer than anywhere else in the school had felt in 2 years. During lunch, I called the hospital. I asked if they could send letters from the ER doctor and paramedics confirming that my translation prevented a fatal medication error. The administrator said she'd try. Meanwhile, social media blew up. Half the comments said, rules are rules, while the other half argued, saving a life matters more. I deleted the apps. I didn't want to be anyone's political symbol. After chemistry, my teacher quietly admitted the language policy felt wrong, but said teachers could lose their jobs for speaking up. She pointed me to a page in the student handbook showing the district's non-discrimination language that contradicted the English-only rule. That evening, a legal aide named Ruben Guidry called us. He explained that Title VI protects language minorities, but schools often claim safety exceptions. A federal complaint would take months, way past graduation. The pressure mounts. The next morning, I requested a Spanish interpreter for my hearing. The secretary refused, saying they only provide them for special education meetings. I wrote down her exact words. Mike Farr, the assistant principal, pulled me aside and suggested I just take Saturday detention instead of fighting this. He looked tired. The easy path tempted me for about 2 seconds before I remembered my grandmother's face. I told Mike, thanks, but no thanks. The rest of the week crawled by. My grandmother called twice, but I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't risk it. Mom took time off work to help me prepare, even though she couldn't afford to lose the hours. We stayed up late practicing what I would say in English, explaining why speaking Spanish saved a life. The morning of the hearing, the scholarship committee sent a message about reviewing all disciplinary records. My hands went cold. 4 years of straight A's and perfect attendance could mean nothing if this suspension went through. Gathering evidence. During study hall, an email from Ruben popped up. He found that recording hallway audio might violate state privacy laws, but courts usually sided with schools on safety. Then, a classmate sent me a shaky video showing Principal Harris standing by the entrance with his personal phone pointed right at me during the emergency call. He hadn't just caught me on security cameras, he deliberately recorded me himself, waiting for me to mess up. I forwarded the video to Orlando immediately. Orlando helped me create a timeline. He made me stick to cold, hard facts, no emotions, just timestamps. The next day, I gathered anonymous statements from other students. One girl lost her National Honor Society spot after answering her mom's call in Vietnamese. A Haitian boy's parents stopped coming to games because they feared speaking French. The stories kept coming, revealing a pattern of fear. I typed up a formal grievance to the district, citing discrimination and denial of interpreter services. Principal Harris started showing up everywhere I went, surveilling me. The pressure was suffocating. I had a panic attack before chemistry class, shaking, too scared to even speak Spanish to calm myself down. They'd made me afraid of my own voice. The night before, the district responded to my interpreter request with a refusal. Tough luck, basically. I practiced my statement, forcing myself to say cardiac medication instead of medicina cardiaca. My tongue felt thick and clumsy. But then, a breakthrough. The doctor sent the letter. It stated clearly, my translation prevented a potentially fatal medication error. Holding that paper felt like putting on armor. Mike Farr showed up at my house with a final offer. Sign a paper agreeing not to discuss the policy publicly, and they'd reduce the punishment to detention. I almost reached for the pen. I was so tired of fighting. But signing meant staying quiet while other kids suffered. I told him no. My grandmother sat with me that night. She told me in Spanish to speak the truth, even if it cost me everything. That truth was more important than their rules. I wrote her words down on an index card to read at the hearing. The hearing? Orlando showed up wearing a button-down shirt. We walked into the conference room. Principal Harris sat at the head with his laptop. Mike Farr was there, along with a woman from the district and my English teacher. There was no interpreter. Harris played the video. It showed me running, my mouth moving fast, switching languages. He stated, the evidence showed willful defiance. I kept my voice steady. I admitted I spoke Spanish. I explained the medical mix-up. I slid the hospital letter across the table to the district representative. Policies exist for a reason, Harris argued. Making exceptions would undermine the entire system. The district woman read the letter, then the anonymous statements I handed her. The way she practices saying cardiac medication instead of medicina cardiaca shows how our brains store knowledge in different languages, she mused, looking at the evidence. How does forcing someone to translate medical terms help anyone? She read about the family who missed a funeral and the child who wet himself because he couldn't ask for the bathroom. Her eyebrows went up. Harris's jaw tightened. Mom spoke next, her English choppy but powerful. Orlando whispered words to me when she got stuck, and I repeated them for the room. She said she was proud of me for saving her grandmother. The district woman typed faster. The verdict? Mike Farr tried to cut a deal again, reduce the suspension to 1 day if I withdrew the grievance. I refused. I want the policy reviewed. Harris got angry, insisting school-level decisions didn't require district approval. The district woman reminded him that civil rights complaints were different. They went back and forth while my fate hung in the air. Finally, the decision came down. 1 day of in-school suspension. My record would be flagged as under review, and the district would launch an inquiry into interpreter policies. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a total loss. I signed the paper. The aftermath? I spent my suspension day in a windowless room doing worksheets, missing a chemistry lab that dropped my grade from an A to a B. Kids walked by, whispering. Some thought I got off easy, others thought I caused trouble for nothing. That evening, I sat with my grandmother, watching soaps. We didn't talk about the hearing. She just ran her fingers through my hair. 3 days later, the district announced limited inquiry into language access. Teachers seemed nervous around me now. Being right didn't mean being welcome. 2 weeks later, a memo went out. Emergency exception for language use during medical or safety situations. Principal Harris read it to the school in the narrowest way possible, but it was progress. The scholarship committee deferred their decision until my record was clear, leaving me in limbo. I wrote an op-ed for the school paper about walking around half-voiced. Other kids came up to me, highlighting parts that matched their lives. The last week of school, I passed Principal Harris in the hall. We didn't acknowledge each other, but I didn't look away. I kept walking to class, still careful with my words, but no longer silent about things that mattered. The fight wasn't over, but I was still standing. And sometimes that's enough. Thanks for letting me explore all these questions with you today. It's been really interesting wondering about things together. Until next time, like the video, it helps more than you think.